This is your world. PPT has been a structured romp through the intellectual history of our world. In semester 1, we began with classical China, moved on through India, Bactria, what is now Pakistan, with a few forays into Greece and ancient Rome. This semester, we continue the romp, extending it into Western Europe and reading, of course, more texts from China, the South Asian continent, and even a text from a guy who spent his formative years in South Africa. Notice what is not here. The rest of the world. The Americas, the rest of Africa, the Middle East, the rest of West Asia, Kamchatka, Japan, our little corner of the world, the Malay Peninsula, Australasia. There's a lot we don't cover. But I'm still proud of the global focus of what we managed to accomplish in PPT. Now, in contrast to semester 1, semester 2, where we are now, is not geographically arranged. Instead, we've arranged it by themes or units. There are 3 of them. The first concerns self and world, each of us, and how we relate to the world around us, and big questions about what we can know of reality as a whole. Second, we turn once again to politics and society and consider what we owe each other, the nature of states or governments, what they are, how they come to be, and what they should be like. And then we spend a few weeks looking back at the great adventure we've had, reflecting on these great traditions using the lens of modernity, among other things. So this is the big picture view of PPT-2 and the term to come. Right now, we're at Unit 1, Self and World, and we're at Ibn Tufayl, the first text within that first unit. Welcome. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad to see you all. Oh no, you don't clap at the beginning, you clap at the end of the semester when we've actually done all these things we said we're going to do. Let's begin with you and some things that you know. Each of you, I suspect, I hope, knows your own name. Many of you know the atomic number of gold, and some of you know the price of Bitcoin. Maybe you're thinking about it right now instead of following this lecture. How do you come to know these things? Well, in the case of your name, I suspect it's pretty simple. Your mother or your father told it to you. Or perhaps many people have told it to you over the years, reinforcing your sense, your knowledge of your own name. How do you know the atomic number of gold? Well, you read it in a book. How do you know the price of any of these crypto assets, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Zilliqa, or others besides? You look it up on a website. The fancy philosopher word for this way of coming to know things is testimony. People telling you things. This is certainly one way to come to know about a reality. Here's some more things you know. You know that 1 and 2 is not 4. It isn't. You know that there are a bunch of stars up there, and if you watch them closely enough, you'd start to see regular patterns in how they move around in our sky. And you can even look at a picture like this and know, after thinking about it for a bit, which cup will fill first. Intuition alone will tell you. So it looks like in addition to testimony, people telling you things, here's another way to come to know. Simple reflection and looking around, observation. So we can come to know on the basis of testimony, by thinking about things, or by sensing. We can use our minds, our senses, and our social world as ways to know. I've thus far been using somewhat mundane examples. Now, my own view is that the price of Bitcoin is far from mundane, but we can turn our attention to more interesting and capacious topics. Consider our cosmos as a whole. Questions about fundamental reality as it concerns the totality of physical things. Has it always been here? What's it like? Did somebody put it there? Who? Why? Supposing there is a grand designer of all that we see, what were their intentions? These are fundamental questions of cosmos and God. So let me now ask this. When it comes to these questions of fundamental reality, of God and cosmos, certainly we might come, or think we might come to know about them on the basis of testimony, with a little help from our friends. You talk to your pastor, or your priest, or your friends, or your mom, or you consult a holy book. You look it up and come to some answer of these grand questions of God and cosmos. Does it have to work that way, though? Put just a little bit differently, what could we know, if anything, about God and cosmos, about fundamental reality, using our minds or our senses, each of us on our own? Can we learn about God just by thinking or just by looking around? This is the big philosophical question that will drive much of the content of the rest of this lecture. And we use it as a lens through which to think about Ibn Tufayl and this little book we've read. Here's how the lecture will unfold. We'll think about Ibn Tufayl and his intellectual context. We'll take a look in broad strokes at what Ḥayy learned, what he was able to figure out all on his own, with mind and observation. And then we'll spend a good bit of time looking in detail at one argument Ḥayy discovers, his cosmological argument. Then we'll close by taking a look at the PPT team that will be guiding you through the rest of our intellectual romp. If I had to sum up Ibn Tufayl's intellectual context, it would be with these three words: medieval, Abrahamic, philosophy. Medieval, roughly 400 in the Common Era to 1400 in the Common Era. Abrahamic, concerning Christian, Islamic, and Jewish contributions to reflection on the tenets of their respective faiths. This is something of a golden age for philosophy of religion. Thinkers across these great traditions, in the Middle East, in Northern Africa, and West Asia, and throughout Europe, thought about their religious doctrines using the tools of philosophy. And something of a majority report emerged, which, if we had to be just a little bit glib and irresponsibly compressed in our statement of it, would look something like this. First, we observe deep regard for Aristotle. Indeed, the regard for him was so deep that he wasn't even called Aristotle by many. Instead, he was simply the philosopher, capital P. And he is, in Islamic faith, counted as the first teacher. So you have the prophets, the teachers. Aristotle is the first, the most important of the teachers. And the key gambit that we observe across these three traditions is to explain the content of various religious claims using Aristotelian philosophy. So, for example, Christians believe in this doctrine of the Trinity, and then we use Aristotle's doctrine of form and matter to try to sort out how that could work. Or we have this idea of creation, and we use form and matter to think about how God came to create things out of nothing, but somehow through the designs of God's own mind. Well, there's the form, the matter. This is how it goes. But for our purposes, it's perhaps more important to observe this. These thinkers doing Abrahamic philosophical theology argued that their doctrines were true using key Aristotelian arguments, or arguments inspired by Aristotle's writings. So the claim here is not just that we can unpack theology using the tools of philosophy, it's that we can come to know that certain tenets of theology are the sober truth using the tools of philosophy. We can come to know, for example, that there's a God, or, as we'll see, that certain key claims of the Islamic faith are true without the Quran, without an imam, using only our minds and the arguments inspired by Aristotle. You may well already have reservations about this project. Can we really figure out things like this all on our own? Can you learn about God and cosmos just by thinking about it? And if so, what's the role of sacred scripture, of ceremony, of priests and popes and imams and rabbis? Why do we need all these guys to tell us the way reality is if we could just figure it out ourselves by thinking or observing? If you feel the force of questions like that, you're in good company. Someone like Al-Ghazali, a great Muslim philosopher of the same period, was in that skeptical mood. And he took a rather dim view to the ability of our own minds and observation to figure this stuff out. He thought, no, we need the book. We need the Quran. Ibn Tufayl has a slightly different view, however. If I had to sum up his view, or the questions that we'll think about, it's something like this. Just how useful is revelation? And again, what can we know about God and cosmos, each of us on our own? Let's turn to Ibn Tufayl himself. He lived in the later quarter of what I've called the medieval era, and in what is now Spain. He was a colorful and well-known figure in his local caliphate, widely respected as, among other things, a philosopher, a logician, a doctor, and an astronomer. And perhaps it's no surprise to you to learn that he was a doctor who specialized in dissection. In fact, he was so interested in this that one key scene in the book involves Ḥayy, the main character, dissecting his own mother, the doe. A rather shocking scene if you think about it, unless you're Ibn Tufayl and all you want to think about is dissection. If we wanted to sum up his view, I think we could use these two words: mystical rationalism. Let's start with the rationalism part. Ibn Tufayl thinks that we can indeed figure out a bunch of this stuff, each of us, without revelation, using our ratiocination, our minds, our reason. We can do that. But it doesn't stop there. Ecstatic or mystical experience is, though not essential for knowing or coming to know, it is essential for good practice, for living well in the light of these doctrines we've each discovered on our own. What Ibn Tufayl wants to do for us is to give us an experience through a story, so each of us can come to learn this on our own, independent of the testimony he is offering. I want only to bring you along the paths in which I have preceded you. Then you will not need to confine yourself within the limits of my knowledge. Interesting, isn't it? That he thinks his testimony would in fact be confining. If he simply told you these things, told you these truths that he wants you to discover, that wouldn't be enough. It would be confining somehow. What he wants us to do is to take a journey with him, to live out a story, and then to each come to know it on our own. The story is the story of a desert island. So let's talk about desert islands. This is a classic literary genre or trope or conceit. And at its heart, it has this thought. Put some people on an island, isolated somehow, see what they do. Or put one guy on an island, isolated, and see what he does. And this somehow will tell us about human nature, whether together or individually. It'll tell us something about what kinds of things we are, what we're inclined to do, what we can and cannot do, and perhaps even what we should do. And we can learn that just by thinking about what people would do in isolation, a group of people, or perhaps even just one person. Of course, this is not an experiment, it's a thought experiment. Imagine the review board reactions if you tried to do a controlled experiment dropping people alone onto desert islands. No, we do this in the mind alone, and we use stories to think about this. You're familiar with some of these stories already, I'm sure. The first few episodes of Lost, before it turned into something else. Lord of the Flies, Daniel Defoe's great novel, Robinson Crusoe, which in fact was inspired by Defoe's reading of an early English translation of the book we read for today, Ḥayy bin Yaqẓān. Here's a famous frontispiece from that early English edition depicting Ḥayy dissecting his mother, the doe. Ibn Tufayl did not write an essay for us. It has some essay-like moments. They're discursive or didactic. But the book as a whole is not an essay, it is a story. I think he did that because he's trying to convey something that cannot merely be conveyed, or cannot easily be conveyed in any ways, through an essay alone. There's something ineffable here. Here's a nice line. This is quoting Al-Ghazali approvingly. It was. What it was is harder to say. Think the best, but don't make me describe it away. We're supposed to learn something from this story by our experience of the story that goes beyond what you can learn merely by testimony, merely by Ibn Tufayl telling you things. Desert island stories often take place in the tropics. Interesting, isn't it? This one's no exception. And if we want to figure out where it takes place, well, Ibn Tufayl leaves a few clues for us. Somewhere south of India, our forefathers of blessed memory tell of a certain equatorial island with a uniform climate, neither excessively hot nor excessively cold. We're starting to get a picture of where this might be, but he adds a little bit more so we can be more precise. He says they say that opposite this island is a large island, rich and spacious and inhabited. So the story doesn't take place on the big island. It's more in this little one off at the very bottom edge of that peninsula. Okay, so we've got a guy alone on an island. What does that teach us, and what did he learn? I'll rush through a couple of these. Ḥayy learned that living things have an immaterial component, or soul, that the souls of these things differ in kind. Plant souls are different from animal souls, which are different from Hayy's own rational soul. And the material world, surprise, surprise, is composed of the same basic four elements that Aristotle thought the world was composed of. Wow. Furthermore, what comes to be must have a cause. Ḥayy looked around and saw various events coming into being, and each time he looked, he could find a cause beforehand that caused that event to come to be. So the cosmos itself, the totality of physical things, has a maker, a cause of its coming to be, something that didn't come to be itself, but that exists without qualification. And that is, in fact, because it's not part of the cosmos, therefore incorporeal and unimaginable. We'll return to that last point in just a second. If we want to boil it down even further with a TLDR, we could put it this way. Even a spontaneously generated human being on a desert island, all by his lonesome self, would discover key Aristotelian arguments. And in fact, these arguments support many of the central and distinctive claims of Islam. Think about that last one, that God is incorporeal and cannot be imagined. Have any of you ever been in a mosque? I hope so. If you haven't, you should someday. Will you find pictures of Allah or representations of the Prophet or indeed of other teachers? You will not. It is forbidden. You'll find many beautiful things, like designs like this. You will not find pictures of Allah. It is forbidden. Ibn Tufayl gives an argument for this, for why God not just can't be imagined, but shouldn't even be tried to be imagined. So what we see here is not just someone trying to construct the medieval Islamic worldview from scratch. Not just trying to construct a theistic worldview, that is. Not just an Abrahamic worldview, but a distinctively Muslim one, or Islamic. So, Ḥayy, all on his lonesome, finds a medieval Islamic worldview starter pack. How did he do so? By thinking and by observing. Notice again what is absent. The book. Muslims are people of the book. So too are Jews and Christians, or so they say. It should startle us, put us on a bit of a quest to figure out why someone, a faithful Orthodox follower of a tradition, a person of the book, like Ibn Tufayl, could think you could do all this without the book. It's a question well worth thinking about in your seminars, and as you reflect further in the book on your own. There's a promissory note here that Ibn Tufayl's made. The promise is that we can do all this without the book. How do we evaluate promises like that? Well, here's my proposal. What we do is we take a look at one argument in depth and figure out if that argument is valid and sound. To the extent that it is, that gives us some evidence that we can do this without the book. And if not, then not. So one way to pursue this thought and figure out whether Ibn Tufayl's promise is a good one is just to go deep. That's what I'll do in what remains of this lecture. And we'll do this by thinking about Hayy's cosmological argument. One of the main arguments that Ḥayy discovers and thinks through in his time on the island. Cosmological because it's about the cosmos as a whole, its structure, whether it had a beginning or an end, and if it did begin, whether it had a cause of its beginning, and if it did have a cause, whether that cause is material or immaterial, and so on. Before looking at the logic of the argument, though, I want to get you in the mood. So imagine this. You're on a desert island. You've been there for 30 plus years, utterly alone. Every night you look up at the starry heavens above. What do you see in the shadow and quiet of the night? There are these beautiful twinkling things, some brighter, some a bit more dim. They appear to be very far away. They come and they go. If you took good notes, you'll start to see some order emerge in how they come and go. But how would this make you feel? Think of yourself alone on a beach in a place with no light pollution. When you look up above, what do you feel? I'll tell you what I feel. I feel small. I see a grand world out there much bigger than me, and much bigger even than the world of PPT, than our own tiny blue dot, this globe. And I begin to wonder, has it always been this way? How big is it, this cosmos that I'm looking at? Has it always been there? Did somebody put it there? Are there grand designs or orders behind it all? So notice here that these questions are, of course, deeply theoretically interesting. They concern cosmology, a sort of intersection of physics and philosophy and astronomy, but not astrology. Those are theoretically important questions at the forefront of our science and our other technical disciplines, where they intersect with philosophy. Deeply theoretically interesting. But they're also existentially gripping. They concern our own sense of how we fit into the world and what it all means. I think that if you've been alone on an island for a long time, you'll be gripped by both of those elements of this inquiry. The theoretical elements, yes, but also the existential ones. So these questions matter. In reflecting on these questions, Ḥayy came across a dilemma. When wondering about the cosmos, the universe, he began to worry, well, is it eternal? That is, has it always been here? Or did it come to be? And it seemed to him that this was a very important question. Have things always been here? Or did they come to be? Is there a beginning in the finite past? Let's say 13.9 billion years ago. Is the universe eternal? Ḥayy then wondered what he could learn on the basis of the answer to this question. For example, suppose he got a negative answer by reflecting on it and working through the arguments. What would that then show him? Or a positive answer. Now, I know you all have done the readings, despite your busy weekend. So I know you know the answer here. In fact, you know the conclusion Ḥayy came to, which is that it doesn't matter. Interesting. He fussed for 7 years over whether the cosmos had a beginning, and then realized that he could in fact derive the same conclusion that he wished to get to, or that he was thinking about getting to, no matter which way he went, whether the universe was eternal or not. He pondered over the problem, but the arguments always seemed to cancel each other out, so he couldn't really make progress. Baffled and exhausted by this dilemma, he began to wonder what each of the beliefs entailed. Perhaps the implications were the same. That is, perhaps you could derive the same conclusion no matter whether the universe was eternal or not eternal, whether it began or didn't have a beginning in the finite past. And out of this insight, which is a nice little bit of clever logic, Ḥayy constructed what I'll call his master cosmological argument. We begin with the dilemma. The universe is either eternal or not. Then we add this. If the universe is not eternal, then it has a non-corporeal cause. We'll work through his reasoning behind these premises shortly. And if the universe is eternal, then it has a non-corporeal cause. Therefore, the universe has a non-corporeal cause. So we don't actually have to figure out whether the universe began in time or not to derive that conclusion in line 4. Clever. Of course, what you want to know now is, well, are premises 2 and 3 true? Do we have reason to believe that there must be a non-corporeal cause of the cosmos, whether or not it was eternal? Before we consider that question, just ask this, though. Is the argument valid? Some of you will know what that word means, and you know how to tell, which is that you draw a truth table. I'm not going to do that for you, but I'll just tell you confirm. Argument valid. which means that if the premises are true, the conclusion is true as well. So we can pass from validity to soundness, questioning each of these premises, the key premises, 2 and 3, that is. So let's look at them in turn. Premise 2 says, if the universe is not eternal, then it has a non-corporeal cause. We've already encountered the thought behind this premise, and I think it's a fairly intuitive one. Now I want to present to you 2 ways of presenting that thought, one of which is good and one of which is bad. Here's the good way. Everything that comes to be has a cause. Here's the bad way. Everything has a cause. Now there's a key difference between these 2 ways of thinking about how to justify the premise. The first way, that things that come to be have a cause, we can justify on the basis of experience. So think of things that you know that have begun to exist in time, that didn't exist and then started existing. Did something cause them to start to exist? It seems so. A seed turned into the tree. The death of Hayy's mother was caused by, actually I forget what caused her death, but there was a cause. And your being here in the room today or watching online is caused by an email reminder that someone sent to you, or by your own ambitions for completing a college education, and so on. Things that come to be tend to have causes, and in fact it looks like all of them do. So that's the good way of trying to justify this premise. Here's the bad way. Everything has a cause. This is a bad way, I say, because it leads to this very uncomfortable question. Okay, so we're leading to an argument that concludes there's a maker of the cosmos. Well, if everything has a cause, then the maker must have a cause as well. Well, who caused God? Well, it looks like that's a very uncomfortable question for someone presenting this kind of argument. In a way, it doesn't really even make sense, which is why proponents of this argument do not say that thing, the bad thing. At least theists don't say that. Now, of course, other thinkers do say this thing. We'll encounter one of them in a few weeks' time, the great Buddhist metaphysician Shantideva, who in the Bodhicharya Avatara thinks that everything does have a cause or an explanation, and for that reason concludes that the structure of reality and its causal explanation isn't a linear line from past to future. Instead, it's more like this interconnected web or net where everything depends on everything. But Shantideva was not a theist trying to argue for a first cause of the cosmos. So he is free to put things, as I call it, the bad way. Ibn Tufayl is not. And the reasoning from there to a maker is fairly, again, intuitive. I think you can probably get it pretty easily. If you assume that the universe had come to be, it could not have come into existence by itself, but must instead have a maker to give it being. This maker could not be perceptible to the senses, otherwise it would be a material body in need of a cause. So we have the whole cosmos. So we're looking for a cause of the cosmos, supposing it came to be. Well, we can't look inside the thing for a cause. That would be a thing causing itself. That's incoherent. So we have to look outside the cosmos, i.e. something that can't be seen and that is immaterial. If we looked inside the cosmos for a chain of causes inside the cosmos itself, we would face a different kind of problem. It would be a vicious, infinite regress. If this second cause were physical, it would need a third, a fourth, and so ad infinitum, which is absurd. There's an important assumption being made here, which is that an actual infinity is impossible. Ibn Tufayl here follows Aristotle in thinking that infinities of a certain kind cannot be. We'll return to that question, or that assumption, shortly, but notice that it is playing an operative role in premise 2. So we can see now why you would think that if the universe began to exist, then it has a non-corporeal cause. The other horn of the dilemma is slightly more puzzling, for me, at least. It says that if the universe is eternal, that is, the universe did not begin to exist, then it has a non-corporeal cause. Here's what Hayy's thinking. Alternatively, Ḥayy saw that if he assumed the eternity of the world, this would imply that its motion too was eternal. Every force in a material body must be finite. Should we discover a force engaged in the infinite task of keeping the universe running like a big machine forever, that force cannot belong to a physical thing. So we need an infinite source of force to keep this machine of the cosmos running, lest entropy bring it to a slow halt or heat death. And yet, we don't find infinite sources of physical force or energy. There's the same assumption is operative here as well, which is that physical things cannot be infinite in the required sense. Each physical thing exerts only finite force. The assumption, again, is that an actual infinity is not possible. So interestingly, behind both premises 2 and 3, we see a common assumption that actual infinities are impossible. The thing to do now, of course, is to ask whether that assumption itself is true. Let me first draw your attention to a distinction to understand the assumption better, which is the distinction between actual and potential infinity. This is an obscure distinction, but I'll give it my best shot. Let's begin with a number. The number 1, for example. We add a number line, and then we add the number 2. How many numbers are in between 1 and 2? It's a trick question. No matter what you say, something funky follows. So let's say we said there are not any between 1 and 2. Well, then what I would do is I would show this slide. I say, there's one. 1.5 in between 1 and 2. And of course, if you said there aren't any numbers between 1 and 2, or there are numbers between 1 and 2, I'd say, where? Point to them. All I see is 1 and 2. In some sense, the numbers are already there in the number line, but not yet. Somehow, they're there in potency or potential. Their potential to be in the number line is there, but not until we actually add them in a representation of that line. Now, this is very obscure. I'm not sure this distinction makes sense, but Aristotle thought it made sense, and Ibn Tufayl thought it made sense. So the hypothesis, or the assumption behind these two premises, is that potential infinities are possible. You could have a line that potentially could be chopped up into many, many different numbers, but actual infinities, the number line actually being composed of all those points or all those numbers, is not possible. Now, Ḥayy actually finds an argument that supports this Aristotelian dogma, the impossibility of actual infinities. I'll call this the line argument. It too begins with a thought experiment. Imagine two lines passing through the body to infinity as far as the body itself extends. More precisely, let's call these things not lines but rays, because they begin on the finite end, or the bounded end, of this infinite body. So we have two lines, or two rays, A and B. Each extends forever in one direction. Now imagine a large segment is cut from the finite end of 1. So there's the bounded end of one of these lines. We take our metaphysical scissors and cut a finite segment off of that line. So now the line looks like this. And the two are placed side by side with the cut end of one opposite, that is next to, the uncut end of the other. So we have lines A and B, and then we pull A so that it's lined up with B on the bounded end. Then I must discover either that the pair of lines really do extend to infinity, the one no shorter than the other, or else that the one does not run the full length of the other, but stops short of the full course, in which case it is finite. The reasoning here is just a little bit tricky, but perhaps we can put it this way. Consider the question. So look at our two lines, A and B. Consider the question, is A as long as B? It looks like something funky or absurd is going on no matter what we say here. If A is as long as B, then the cut line equals the intact one, which is absurd. How could you make a line shorter and then it's still as long as the other line that was exactly as long as before you did the cut? That's weird. Didn't it get shorter? Okay, so that option is absurd, that A is as long as B. But let's say A is not as long as B, but then A must be finite. If the finite segment that was subtracted is restored, the whole is infinite. This is a bit tricky. The idea is that we took a finite segment away from A, and if we add a finite segment, am I getting this right? I mess this part up every time I give this lecture, I swear to God. I'm not going to try to reproduce the reasoning on the fly, actually. Take a look closer at the text. All of a sudden, I lost the train of thought in my head. I'm just going to press onwards. Structurally, here's what's going on. Ḥayy thinks there are absurd consequences no matter which way we go. If the lines are equal in length, something absurd follows. And if they're not equal in length, then something absurd follows. Let's put this as an argument so we can see how the steps fit together. If actual infinities are possible, then the cut is possible. That's just our thought experiment. If the cut is possible, then either line A is as long as line B or not. Both of these scenarios, the is long as scenario or is not as long as scenario, both of them are impossible. So the cut is impossible, the thought experiment that we're using. Therefore, actual infinities are impossible. There's a lot going on here. Let me just draw a couple of observations before we move on. We have here relied on a thought experiment. It's pictorial. Cutting is the same length as, and so on. This is picture thinking. And picture thinking is a fine way to start inquiry. It's rarely a good way to end inquiry. Usually, to make progress, we have to move beyond mere pictures or metaphors. So my question is, can we make this more precise? In Ibn Tufayl's day, the answer is probably no. That is, mathematicians of Ibn Tufayl's era didn't have the intellectual tools to think more precisely about collections of things and how many of them there were, sets and cardinalities, or other ways of reasoning about infinities. We do now, in fact, for over 130 years. I think we face a dilemma then. So we have these operations and relations represented in our thought experiment by these pictorial things like cutting or is the same length as. And we can either give them rigorous mathematical definitions or not. So that's the dilemma. If we are defined, here's a suspicion, then the cut segment is indeed as long as the uncut segment without absurdity. And to get a feel for that, just do a little bit of set theory. Think about a set like the set of the whole natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Take away 1 and 2 from out of that set, and then ask, is that set the same size as the set of the natural numbers without the subtraction? The answer is yes. You can have a 1, 1 onto function across those sets. They're the same size, or at least in this sense, they have the same cardinality. If you've done a little set theory, that thought will not appear unnatural. So you'll start to think, maybe it's not so absurd that these segments could be as long as each other, despite one of them having some elements removed from it. Of course, we could decline to do that. We could say, no, we're not going to define these concepts. We're going to leave them pictorial or mere thought experiments or picture thinking. In which case, it looks to me like we cannot issue clear results from that thought experiment. So we have this assumption at the heart of the argument. And my own hypothesis right now is that this assumption deserves a little bit of skepticism. We should put a question mark, or maybe even 2, around that assumption. And therefore, we should put a question mark, or even 2, around Hayy's master argument. Now, to say there's a question mark there doesn't mean the argument is unsound. It just means that we need to think more about it. Perhaps we could use other tools. For example, the tools of contemporary cosmology, or more rigorous mathematics available to us now. If you want to do that, here are 2 things you can do. Go to YouTube and look up Hilbert's Hotel. You'll see some cool videos showing the somewhat recent history of mathematics, how mathematicians think about this, and which will in turn give you a feel for how to think about thought experiments in relation to the infinite. And if you want to get more serious, then look up the Kalam cosmological argument, which is the contemporary term for this family of arguments, one member of which is Hayy's argument, but there are others. And these got a boost in the 1930s because of Big Bang cosmology, according to which the cosmos does have a beginning in the finite past, which tells us which horn of the dilemma to pick and to pursue, that yes, the universe did begin to exist in the finite past, things that begin to exist have causes, and we're off to the races looking for the cause of the cosmos. Some questions for you to think about. Can we know the fundamental truths about God and cosmos, each of us, on our own? Or do you need your pastor, your priest, your imam, your rabbi, your sacred scripture, your hadith, your creed to figure this stuff out? Does your own mind suffice? Suppose so. Suppose there are good arguments for the existence of God. We still face this question. How do arguments for the existence of God square with religious practice? Many of you are religious. You go to church, you pray, you give alms. But you don't do that because of some philosophy argument. You do it for other reasons. So the question is, what do these philosophy arguments have to do with religion as it's actually practiced? It's an important and interesting question. Are arguments necessary for reasonable belief, sufficient, or something else? And here's one way to think about how these arguments relate to religious practice. Think about Hayy's own reception of the 5 pillars of Islam. Remember, he left his island towards the end of the book. He goes to civilization and he encounters people of the book. Now, the author assures us, perhaps for his own protection, that the people that Ḥayy encountered were not Muslims. And yet they gave alms and they prayed and they went on journeys. They practiced some of the 5 pillars of Islam. But Hayy's reception was ambivalent at best. What is Ibn Tufayl telling us here? This is a way, think about that question is a fine way to think about how actual religious practice fits together with this more isolated, speculative, philosophical approach to theology. Go forth and PPT. Cheers, y'all.